Welcome to CTV's Capital Dispatch with Rachel Aiello.
Welcome back to Capital Dispatch. So MPs made it back to Ottawa this week, first time in 2024. And once again, affordability was the main topic of conversation. We had on Monday a series of federal ministers come out and unveil their latest economic plans. This included the housing minister promising to improve building housing for students, both on and off campus. Also, the industry minister is not happy with grocers again, but instead of going forward with some of the tax measures they once threatened, industry minister Champagne said he wrote a letter to the Competition Bureau. So little incremental tinkering from the federal government still on these main two files of grocery prices and housing affordability. Meanwhile, in the House, debate kicked back up again on that farmers' carbon tax carve-out bill. The Conservatives are now pushing for the other parties to back them in essentially scrapping all of the Senate amendments and restoring that bill to as it once was, as it once did pass the House. So we'll be watching to see where that unfolds. Two other files, though, really caught my eye this week. First, happening just down the street from Parliament Hill, was the kickoff to the public hearing portion of the foreign interference inquiry. So this week, the focus was really on a bit more procedural, I guess you could say. The question really centered around finding this balance between upholding national security while still providing Canadians the public transparency they need to be confident that the 2021 and 2019 federal elections were secure. This was really something that ill-fated rapporteur David Johnston warned about, suggesting that a public inquiry couldn't really give Canadians confidence because so much of it would have to be behind closed doors. So over the week, that's what we've heard from witnesses, experts, current and former national security officials, and on Friday, Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc kind of outlining their expectations for what they could or couldn't say so that the Commissioner, Marie-Justine Hogue, can go forward and decide when we start to hear some of the key witnesses in March, whether those meetings have to be in camera or not. Her real kind of modus operandi, as she outlined it this week, was that she wants to focus on getting to the truth, whatever it is, and assessing what foreign interference Canada did and may still be facing. Lastly, something happened later on in this week that I think is going to become a story for weeks to follow. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith issued a more than 7-minute social media video outlining her plans to advance pronoun policies in schools, some restrictions around trans youth access to health services and women's sports. Kind of, I guess, a trial balloon or attack, depending on who you ask, suggesting that these changes are going to be coming in the months ahead, both in policy and legislation. And this really set Ottawa aflurry on Thursday. We heard a lot of outrage and concern from progressives. We had a series of government ministers come out, and I think the way to really encapsulate their response was what Randy Boissonnault said. He's the only Alberta minister in Trudeau's cabinet. He basically equated what Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is promising to the NATO moment for Canada's LGBTQ2S+ community, suggesting an attack on one is an attack on all. So I and other reporters asked the federal government, okay, so what are you going to do? And essentially they're saying it's too soon to say whether it's a charter challenge, withholding federal health funds. So we'll be watching that. The NDP, though, really came out strong. And it was interesting to me because they made one point very clear, that the federal Conservatives, Pierre Poilievre and his party, currently still polling in potential majority government territory, had nothing to say on this. So those are the three issues that really dominated here on the Hill this week. They're back now for a number of weeks, so it'll be an interesting winter. A lot of the same political conversations, a lot of the same toxic energy, tensions in the House, some new issues, but still a lot of the same.
He says, I support the liberal economic policies. Poilievre has not presented one damn economic policy since it's been there. His approach about economic policies is like trying to remove fightings in hockey in removing the referee. They have no economic policy at all. So I cannot be for or against. There's none.
But you could clarify your position on the government's policies.
I voted against all the last budgets of this government, and mise à jour économique, I do not know how to translate that.
So why do you think the Conservatives are tying you to them?
There's no limit about the level of lights he wants on himself. I hope Stornoway has a lot of mirrors in the rooms, because he really does like himself.
So that was obviously Bloc leader Yves-Francois Blanchet speaking to reporters on the Hill this week. I picked this as my quote of the week because I think it is an interesting snapshot of where Poilievre's polling lead, and as we learned this week, fundraising blowout, has the other parties kind of rethinking their political positioning. This response about Mears and Stornoway, the official residence where Pierre Poilievre lives, came in the context of questions around, well, aren't you concerned that the Conservatives are pinning your party, the Bloc, to the Liberals, suggesting you're propping them up on certain occasions, because not every bill or issue or ones the NDP are going to back them on. And Blanchet, as you heard here, got pretty defensive. I just think it's an interesting snapshot of some of the Quebec tensions. Clearly, Poilievre is going after Quebec votes. Clearly, Poilievre is going after anyone who's propping up the Liberals in one way or another. And who doesn't love a zinger? As for what I'm going to be watching next week, two bills. First, debate is continuing on the fall economic update legislation. Less interested in the substance of that, but you probably missed it this week. House Speaker Greg Fergus ruled that bill omnibus in response to a Conservative request. And what does that mean? Well, it is going to be divided into 9 different pieces for votes. He said, essentially, you threw everything and the kitchen sink into this legislation, some budget stuff, some economic update stuff, some labor law changes. And he thinks it's most fair if MPs are able to vote on those items chunk by chunk instead of all as a whole. The other bill I'm going to be watching next week is this new legislation to further extend the expansion of medical assisted dying. The federal government came out this week after hearing calls from provinces, stakeholders, industry, members of parliament, suggesting that the health system needed more time. And the government has agreed. So they've advanced legislation to extend the expansion of MAID to people whose sole underlying condition is mental illness, putting it off until 2027. I think this is going to be an interesting one to watch for 2 reasons. One, they have an extremely short legislative timeline to get this passed. It's coming up in March that they need to have the rules set one way or the other. So they're going to need all parties to come together to help move this through. But also the broader conversation of, what else needs to be done to ensure our health system is ready to be able to handle these requests, or to ensure before an individual gets to this place that they have all the mental health services they need. Interesting, though, about the timing, throwing this to 2027 means it's after the next election. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has already suggested that should his party form the next government, he would scrap this expansion altogether. So then that puts that heightened other question on the table of, because of this extension, is this further expansion completely out of consideration in the foreseeable future? We'll see.